there, listeners! Welcome to our deep dive into Sapiens, a brief history of humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. Grab a cup of coffee and settle in, because we're about to embark on an epic journey through 70,000 years of human history. This isn't just any history lesson, it's a mind-bending exploration of what makes us human, how we got here, and where we might be headed. Let's start at the very beginning. Imagine a world where Homo sapiens, that's us, weren't the only humans around. Hard to picture, right? But that's exactly how things were about 70,000 years ago. We shared the planet with other human species like Neanderthals, Homo erectus, and even a pint-sized species nicknamed hobbits because of how small they were. Now, you might be wondering, if we weren't the only humans, how did we end up ruling the planet? Great question. Harari argues it all comes down to something called the cognitive revolution. This was a major upgrade to our brains that happened around 70,000 years ago. But here's the kicker, it wasn't just that we got smarter. The real game changer was our newfound ability to create and believe in shared myths or stories. This allowed us to cooperate flexibly in large numbers, something no other species could do. So think about it this way. Ants and bees can work together in huge numbers, but it's all hardwired. They can't suddenly decide to change their social structure. Chimps and wolves can be more flexible, but only in small groups. We humans, we can create imagined realities, things like religions, nations, money, and human rights, that allow thousands or even millions of strangers to work together towards common goals. Harari gives this fantastic example of Peugeot, the car company. It's not a physical thing you can touch or see, but an imagined reality that exists because we all agree it does. This ability to create and believe in shared fictions is what allowed us to conquer the globe, and unfortunately drive other human species to extinction. Now, let's fast forward a bit to about 12,000 years ago. This is when the agricultural revolution kicked off, and boy, did it shake things up. Humans started settling down, growing crops, and domesticating animals. On the surface, this seems like a great idea, right? More food, more security. But hold on to your hats, because Harari is about to drop a bombshell. He argues that the agricultural revolution might have been history's biggest fraud. Why? Well, for starters, it actually made life harder for most people. Farmers worked longer hours than foragers, had a less varied diet, and were more vulnerable to disease. So why did we do it? Harari suggests it was a trap. Each small change seemed beneficial, but we didn't foresee the long-term consequences. Once we started, there was no going back. The agricultural revolution did allow human populations to explode, though. This led to the creation of cities, kingdoms, and empires. But it also brought new problems. How do you get thousands of strangers to cooperate? This is where those shared myths really came into play. Take the Code of Hammurabi, for instance. This was a set of laws from ancient Babylon that divided people into classes, superiors, commoners, and slaves. It claimed to be based on eternal principles of justice dictated by the gods. But in reality, it was just one way of organizing society, no more true or natural than any other. Or consider the American Declaration of Independence. It proclaims that all men are created equal, another imagined reality. From a biological perspective, humans aren't equal at all, but this shared belief allows American society to function. Harari makes a crucial point here. These imagined orders aren't just in our heads. They're built into the material world around us. Think about how modern houses are designed with separate bedrooms for children, reflecting our belief in privacy and individualism, or how medieval castles were built, reflecting very different social values. Now, let's talk about some of the darker aspects of these imagined orders. They often create hierarchies and unjust discrimination. The caste system in India, racial segregation in America, gender inequality. All of these are examples of how imagined orders can lead to real oppression. Speaking of hierarchies, let's dive into one that's been particularly persistent throughout history: gender. In almost all known human societies, Men have been valued more highly than women. But why? Some argue it's because men are physically stronger, but Harari points out that this doesn't really hold up. Women are often more resistant to hunger, disease, and fatigue. And anyway, in human societies, social power isn't directly related to physical strength. Others suggest it's because men are more aggressive and violent. But again, this doesn't explain why the people managing wars and enjoying their fruits should also be men. After all, wars require cooperation and complex organization, not just brute force. In the end, Harari admits we don't really know why patriarchy has been so universal. What we do know is that it's not based on biological facts, but on myths we've created and perpetuated. Now, let's shift gears and talk about how all these imagined orders have shaped our world. One of the biggest impacts has been on our relationship with other animals and the environment. When sapiens first left Africa, we quickly spread across the world, leaving a trail of extinction in our wake. In Australia, for example, within a few thousand years of our arrival, 23 of 24 large animal species went extinct. Similar patterns played out in America and other places we colonized. Harari suggests three main theories for why this happened. One is that these animals, having evolved without human hunters, didn't know to be afraid of us. Another is that we dramatically altered the ecosystem through practices like fire stick farming. The third is that climate changes were already stressing these animals, and our arrival was the final straw. Whatever the exact cause, it's clear that Homo sapiens has been reshaping the global ecosystem for tens of thousands of years. We weren't some nature-loving hippies living in harmony with Mother Earth. We were more like an ecological serial killer, leaving devastation in our wake. This pattern continued with the agricultural revolution. We cleared forests, drained swamps, dammed rivers, and exterminated any animal we saw as a threat or competitor. We also began to domesticate certain animals, dramatically altering their natural life cycles and behaviors. Harari doesn't pull any punches when describing the fate of domesticated animals. He argues that from the perspective of the animals, domestication was a terrible deal. Yes, cows and chickens are evolutionary success stories in terms of numbers, but the vast majority live short, miserable lives in cramped, unnatural conditions. This raises some interesting philosophical questions. If you judge by the number of DNA copies, domesticated animals are incredibly successful. But if you consider the subjective experience of individual animals, it's a different story entirely. A rare wild rhino might be much happier than a factory-farmed chicken, even if there are far fewer rhinos than chickens in the world. Now, let's zoom out and look at the big picture of human history. Harari identifies three major revolutions that have shaped our species: the cognitive revolution about 70,000 years ago, the agricultural revolution about 12,000 years ago, and the scientific revolution, which kicked off about 500 years ago. Each of these revolutions dramatically changed how humans live and interact with the world around them. The cognitive revolution allowed us to cooperate flexibly in large numbers. The agricultural revolution allowed us to manipulate plants and animals, leading to explosive population growth. And the scientific revolution, well, that's given us unprecedented power to reshape not just our environment but ourselves. One of the most profound changes brought about by the scientific revolution was in how we view knowledge itself. Earlier cultures assumed they knew everything important there was to know. Modern scientific culture is built on the admission of ignorance. We assume there are important things we don't know, and this drives us to seek new knowledge. This change in mindset, combined with the marriage of science and empire, European imperialism funded a lot of scientific research, led to explosive progress in fields like physics, biology, and technology. It also gave rise to capitalism, which Harari describes as a religion that worships growth. Speaking of capitalism, let's dive a bit deeper into its impact on our world. Harari describes it as a religion based on the idea of perpetual growth. It's been incredibly successful at generating wealth and driving innovation, but it also has some serious downsides. It's led to extreme inequality, environmental destruction, and the commodification of everything, including our attention and personal relationships. Now, as we move into more recent history, Harari introduces us to three great unifiers of humankind: money, empires, and religion. These forces allowed humans to cooperate on an unprecedented scale, eventually leading to our current globalized world. Let's start with money. It's hard to imagine a world without it, but for most of human history, that was the reality. Money is essentially a system of mutual trust. It works because we all agree it has value. This shared belief allows strangers to cooperate in trade, even if they've never met and don't trust each other personally. Then we have empires. Now, empires often get a bad rap, and for good reason. They were often brutal and oppressive. But Harari points out that they also played a crucial role in spreading ideas, technologies, and cultures. Many of the things we value today, from human rights to scientific knowledge, were spread by empires. And finally, we have religion. Harari defines religion broadly as any system of human norms and values founded on a belief in a superhuman order. This includes traditional religions like Christianity and Islam, but also modern ideologies like humanism, capitalism, and nationalism. These shared beliefs, whether in gods or in human rights, allow large numbers of strangers to cooperate effectively. All of this has dramatically accelerated the pace of change in human societies. For most of history, things changed very slowly. Your great-grandparents' lives weren't that different from your great-great-great-great-great-parents' lives, but in the last few centuries, the world has transformed beyond recognition. This brings us to some big questions about the future. We're now at a point where we can not only reshape our environment, but potentially reshape ourselves. Genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, brain-computer interfaces, these technologies could fundamentally change what it means to be human. Harari paints a picture of the future that's both exciting and terrifying. Thanks to advancements in bioengineering, artificial intelligence, and cyber technology, we might soon have the power to redesign ourselves and create life from scratch. Imagine being able to upgrade your cognitive abilities, extend your lifespan indefinitely, or even create entirely new forms of consciousness. It sounds like science fiction, but Harari argues we're closer to these possibilities than we might think. But here's the catch: these technologies also have the potential to create the most unequal societies in history. Imagine a world where the rich can buy genetic enhancements for their children, creating a biological upper class, or a world where artificial intelligence makes most human labor obsolete, leaving vast numbers of people useless from an economic perspective. Harari doesn't pretend to know exactly what will happen, but he does stress the importance of thinking seriously about these possibilities now, before they become reality. The decisions we make in the coming decades could shape the future of life itself. One of the most thought-provoking ideas in the book is that we might be nearing the end of the era of Homo sapiens, not because we're going extinct, but because we might soon use our technology to transform ourselves into something entirely new. We're the first species that has the power to design not just our environment, but ourselves. This raises some profound questions. What do we want to become? Should we use our technology to eliminate disease, enhance our abilities, and maybe even conquer death? Or are there aspects of our current nature that we should preserve? These are questions without easy answers, but they're ones we'll have to grapple with sooner or later. Throughout the book, Harari challenges us to question our assumptions and think critically about our place in history. He reminds us that many of the things we take for granted, nations, money, human rights, are actually recent inventions in the grand scheme of things. And just as they were created, they could also disappear or be radically transformed. Harari also touches on the ethical implications of our treatment of animals. He points out that the rise of industrial farming has led to unimaginable suffering for billions of animals. Even as we become more ethically conscious in many ways, we've also created systems of animal exploitation on a scale never before seen in history. It's an uncomfortable truth that many of us prefer not to think about. Another fascinating aspect of the book is how Harari challenges our assumptions about happiness and progress. We often assume that with all our technological advancements and material wealth, we must be happier than our ancestors. But Harari argues this might not be the case. He points out that happiness doesn't depend on objective conditions, but on the correlation between objective conditions and subjective expectations. In other words, it's not about what you have, but whether what you have matches what you expect or desire. A medieval peasant might have been content with a full belly and a warm hut, while a modern millionaire might be miserable because they're not a billionaire. This leads to a provocative question: has all our progress actually made us happier? Harari doesn't provide a definitive answer, but he does suggest that our ancient forager ancestors, with their strong social bonds and connection to nature, might have been more satisfied with their lives than we are. As we approach the present day, Harari turns his attention to some of the unique challenges and opportunities we face. One of the biggest is the dissolution of the family and community. Throughout history, humans lived in intimate communities where everyone knew each other. But in the last 2 centuries, these traditional bonds have been replaced by the state and the market. On one hand, this has led to unprecedented individual freedom. We're no longer bound by the strict norms and limitations of traditional communities. But on the other hand, it's left many people feeling alienated and disconnected. We've gained freedom, but lost a sense of belonging and purpose. As we wrap up, let's reflect on some of the big takeaways from Sapiens. First, there's the idea that much of what we consider natural or eternal about human behavior and society is actually quite recent and culturally specific. Our current way of life, with its nations, nuclear families, and market economies, is just one way of organizing human society, not the only or natural way. Second, there's the reminder that progress is not inevitable. Throughout history, societies have risen and fallen, and there's no guarantee that our current global civilization will continue to advance or even survive. This isn't meant to be depressing, but rather to inspire us to actively work towards the future we want. Third, there's the challenge to think critically about where we're headed as a species. With our growing technological powers, we have the ability to reshape not just our world, but ourselves. This is an awesome responsibility and one we need to approach with careful thought and ethical consideration. Finally, there's an invitation to view our own lives and societies from a broader perspective. By understanding where we've come from and how we got here, we can better understand our present and make more informed choices about our future. Sapiens is a book that will make you think differently about what it means to be human. It's a whirlwind tour through our species' history, filled with surprising insights and provocative ideas. Whether you agree with all of Harari's arguments or not, it's sure to expand your understanding of our shared human story. So, what do you think? How does looking at human history on this grand scale change your perspective on our current challenges and opportunities? What kind of future do you think we should strive for? These are big questions, but they're ones that each of us, as members of this remarkable species, have the power to influence. As Harari reminds us, the future is unknown and anything is possible. We've come an incredibly long way in 70,000 years, from insignificant apes to the dominant force on the planet. Where we go from here is up to us. So let's make it count. And that wraps up our deep dive into Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. It's a book that covers an enormous amount of ground, and we've only scratched the surface here. If you found these ideas intriguing, I highly recommend picking up the book and diving in deeper. There's so much more to explore and ponder. Thanks for joining me on this journey through human history. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep imagining the possibilities for our shared human future. This is your host, signing off.